The Atrisco heritage story is one of courage, conviction, and compassion. Faces from the past and faces of today. With names that include Durrani Chavez, Mendoza, Candelaria, and Dominguez. People who overcame all odds to keep, protect, and nurture the land they loved. It's a story that spans more than 400 years, with a genealogical lineage that began with Spanish conquistadors, some of whom settled on this rich farmland right here in Albuquerque's South Valley, an area known as Atrisco. By the early 1600s, many estancias dotted Atrisco, and in 1692, the land was petitioned for and then granted to the Atrisqueños by the King of Spain. These early settlers built their haciendas along the river. They grew corn, beans, squash, chili, wheat, and alfalfa. And sheep herders built corrals and ranches along Atrisco's western edge. Wool and hides were traded for goods with those who traveled the El Camino Real. As with all pioneers, conditions were difficult and sometimes even dangerous. Atrisqueños became accustomed to attacks but learned how to protect themselves from Apache and Navajo raiders. As people of faith, they built a chapel and they called it San Jose de Rancho de Atrisco. And as literate people, they kept records of what was rightfully theirs, preserving their property rights with legal land documents through each generation. By the mid-1700s, Atrisqueños felt hemmed in by the boundaries of their land. Eventually, their requests for expansion were granted, which added over 25,000 acres, extending Atrisco's western edge to the Rio Puerco. With this additional land, the Atrisqueños established a second village, San Ignacio, home to ranchers, farmers, weavers, spinners, shoemakers, and musicians. When Mexico gained its independence from Spain in the 1820s, the people of Atrisco managed to keep their land intact. But when Mexico ceded the New Mexico territory to the United States, it led to more troublesome times. Atrisqueños were happy to be Americans, but the laws were not in their favor, and challenges were frequent. But fiercely protective of their land, the people of Atrisco filed a petition for incorporation in the late 1800s. After more than a decade of uncertainty, their right to the land was validated by the Court of Private Land Claims with a patent signed by President Theodore Roosevelt. The early to mid-1900s saw a decline in agriculture and grazing on the Atrisco lands. Yet Atrisco farmers did their part to provide wool to make army blankets during World War II. One of the first to die for his country in World War II was an Atrisqueño, Antonio Cisneros Tafoya, losing his life in the attack on Pearl Harbor. In 1967, the people of Atrisco voted to create Westland Development Corporation, with the company holding the common lands and the heirs holding the shares. While the creation of Westland was intended to protect the land and be good for all, over time it created disillusionment for many Atrisqueños. The Westland Board held the land and the power, and the people whose ancestors had so deeply loved and cared for the land for more than 350 years found the only thing that still connected them to their land and heritage was an occasional dividend from the corporation. This dissatisfaction eventually led to the sale of Westland's 55,000 acres to SunCal Companies of Irvine, California in 2006. Because for many, they felt they never would see the land as a community benefit again. And so the thought process was, let's simply monetize the asset. But again, what might seem like the final separation of the Atrisqueños from their land actually brought the people and the land closer together. The people were sad to lose their heritage, and this feeling was openly expressed. Buyers responded, and so the sale of land was structured to provide Atrisco heirs with the financial resources to bring philanthropic services to the greater community, once again allowing the land to provide benefit, thereby honoring the many generations who had gone before. The Atrisco story is a tribute to a people who love their land, keeping it whole for past and future generations, for the good of all. But Atrisco's history is just the beginning, the first threads of a larger story, one that will live on for generations to come.